The Bulwark's Tim Miller on Kamala Harris's Glock and how much it matters to the race. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also a CNN contributor and the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over, sign up for our free newsletter today if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America. This week, we are taking a look at Kamala Harris and her Glock and what effect that might have on the race. This week's episode, by the way, is brought to you by The Dispatch, which we will talk about at the end of the show. And we actually have something of a Dispatch competitor on
friendly
the show.
Competitor. We love our friends of The Dispatch.
This week, we have from the Bulwark, the host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller. Welcome to the show, Tim. Tell people just a little bit more about yourself before we get going here.
Sure, man. I was a Republican operative, hack, if you will, press spokesman, Oppo research man. Up until 2016, I was Jeb's communications director. And then Jeb lost, you might remember. And I was asked to be the spokesperson for an anti-Trump PAC. It was kind of it doesn't exist anymore, but it was called Our Principles PAC. It was attempt to basically be anybody but Trump in that 2016 primary. And that was a no-brainer for me because I've found Trump to be completely unappealing and unqualified and unimaginable as president from the moment that he first floated his name into the ring. So I joined that. And what I thought was going to be a 3-month endeavor has turned into like the last decade of my life as a never Trumper, speaking out in media, writing. I wrote a book about it. And now I have a daily podcast over at the Bulwark.
And so I think that gives a pretty good indication of your perspective on some of this stuff. And look, I've had David French on the show a couple of times before, a little bit different probably approach than you but similar point of view. And I'm hoping to have maybe Michael Singleton, somebody like that on the show in the future to give sort of the other point of view. But
those guys are both, and I should just throw this out there. I should just say, just as a baseline, because, never Trumpers, we get kind of lumped in as everybody's a rhino. When it's kind of like not true. It's like a really weird coalition. It's about a bunch of people that were just opposed to Trump, usually over character and judgment decisions. And so somebody like Michael is much more conservative than me on guns. David French is much more conservative than me on a lot of social issues as an evangelical. I was always like a moderate squish, so and I was always a political hack. So like I didn't kind of come up with like a deep ideal. A lot of times people on the conservatives will be like, you've given up your conservative principles. And I was like, I was John McCain's and John Huntsman's flack. Like, I don't know. I think that I've changed my views on some things, but I was always kind of a center-right moderate. And so I do think that informs this conversation a little bit because I am more squishy on particularly on social issues and particularly guns.
And I think we can maybe have a little space at the end to talk more about why, you can make the case for why you think people should vote for Harris, but I'm mainly interested in your analysis. The political hack part is what interests me, because I think that while you have this point of view, you're not somebody, in my experience, listening to your clips on YouTube, which, by the way, have become very popular lately. You're not somebody who's sitting there saying everything Harris does is amazing and everything Trump does is the dumbest political decision ever, despite what you might think about the two candidates or who you're going to vote for. And that's what I find intriguing and where I think you can give some insight to our audience. And hopefully I can bring on someone from a different point of view that will give us the same sort of analysis that can give us honest analysis about what's going on. So, so let's start with that. Like, let's start with put your strategist hat on, right? Your campaign hat on, and let's talk about the recent strategy from the Harris campaign to really emphasize her gun ownership in what I would say are top level basic components. She owns a gun. She doesn't want to take anyone else's guns. She believes in self-defense with guns. That's the message she's been putting out there since the debate. First off, what do you think of that strategy, of this approach, that line that she's repeated? And do you think it's going to be potentially effective? Like, who's she trying? Who do you
Yeah.
think she's trying to go for?
Who-
And do you think it's working?
Yeah, who is that for? Is a good question. And I think it's true. And I think it's a CYA is really what I think it is. I think it is the vice president does not want to go full Beto. And I on a personal level, I do like Beto. He's a sweetheart, and he wears his feelings on his sleeve, and that came back to bite him big time on a few issues, and the gun issue in particular, talking about how we should go and take everybody's guns. And so I think that I think there's a group of people that are more conservative than her on guns. You know, maybe some Reload listeners that are open to her, right? Because they don't like Donald Trump. Right. And so I think that she's trying to reassure that voter, the Liz Cheney voter, if you will, that like the Harris administration is not coming for everybody's guns. Like there will be certain types of reforms. We can talk about which reforms she mentions that she would pursue. But like at the top level, it is kind of a reassurance thing that you can put me in charge. You can set your fears aside that, you know, and hell, maybe in 4 years, you can go back to voting for a Republican, but like, I'm going to get in there and the things that I'm going to do are kind of reasonable and bipartisan. And I respect gun owners and I am a gun owner. And so is Tim Walz. I think that is essentially who it's for. And it's a soft, like, even though the message itself is blunt and like, I'm a Glock owner, like it's really more of a soft signaling thing than it is. I don't think it's something where it's like, there's going to be some Glock owners out there that are like, I think that's really cool and great. And now I'm for it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's a proactive message so much as a CYA.
So you don't think it's an attempt to try and win over like NRA members who vote on gun policy, right?
No. I think it is potentially an attempt to win over NRA members in the casual sense, not in the I'm an active NRA member and that's part of my identity, but people who like join the NRA because they're gun owners, right. who there's a certain type of Democrat and there's a certain type of gun message that is so extreme that it might make them vote for somebody they don't like, or in Trump, or that might make them not vote at all, right? So I think
right.
that is basically the type of person I have in my mind that she is talking to, somebody that is a gun owner that cares about gun policy, isn't their number one issue, and basically she wants to reassure them that they don't need to be scared of her.
Right, and you know, this does seem like something that one, let's talk about some of the differences between how she's doing it and how other Democrats have done this. Because it's not really a new thing, right?
No.
This is a common argument you hear from Democrats and you've heard for 30 plus years. I own guns. I just want common sense gun reform. But usually in the Joe Biden, Tim Walz version of this line, it's I own a shotgun because I like to hunt, right? Yeah. Whereas Harris's line is I own a Glock because I'm going to shoot somebody who breaks into my house, right? I own a Glock for self-defense, right? Yeah. So do you think that's more effective perhaps than the older line? I mean, because I could see that being closer to what the average gun owner own, what kind of gun they own and why they own it.
Yeah. I don't know. This is a bad pundit answer, but my answer to that is I'm not sure. I'd like to see some data on that, and I'd like to hear actual handgun owners, in a focus group. And it's something that we can have Sarah Longwell do in 2025. We can kind of see how they sort of respond to those types of messages. I think that aside from the gun owner element of this, I do think that the other message that she's sending when she says I have a Glock and if you come into my house, I'll shoot you. It's butchering her up a little bit. Like there is also that kind of that she wants to remind, and some of these are these Liz Cheney voters, but some of these are like, black and brown voters that Democrats have lost a little altitude with on crime and other issues, right? That she's like, I am tough. There are going to be punishments for bad guys. Like this is not, the whatever DA you hate. This is not Chesa Boudin in San Francisco coming to the presidency, right? Like I'm a gun owner. We are gonna prosecute criminals, and we are not going to prosecute law-abiding gun owners. We're gonna have common sense reform. So like I think that message is not just for gun owners, but also for maybe non-gun owners who are like just want to be reassured about that she's going to be tough, that she's going to be she's not going to be a pushover.
Interesting. So it kind of connects to like she talks about going after gangs. And
Yes,
cartels
similar.
and
I do
stuff.
think it's very similar to the going after gangs and cartels message for sure. Yeah, I think that those things all tie together.
Okay, that makes sense. But you think playing up that it's a Glock, that's just
I don't think
happenstance,
I think it was a
knows.
happenstance. I don't think she was playing it right because you follow this a little closer to
True.
me. So tell me if I'm wrong. But
Yeah.
she mentioned being a gun owner several times without saying what the gun was, and then it was an answer to Bill Whitaker. Was it an answer in 60
Yes.
Minutes when she first said it was a Glock? And then she did give a pretty natural. I kind of enjoyed her response there, which again I don't think it was a message. It was her being authentic. Which helps, I think, in this case, that it makes it work a little. It makes it more effective than it. It didn't feel like John Kerry out there, whatever type of hunting he was doing in the
Right,
fresh
right.
in the fresh camo. Like he just looked ridiculous. It didn't feel like that. She was like, "Yeah, I've shot it. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I was in law enforcement. I've been to the range, right?" I liked that answer because it felt real.
Yeah, same for the Oprah line where she was like, "Oh, I shouldn't say this." Did you think that was canned, or I don't know? What did you
That
think?
one felt a little more canned, but I don't know. I don't know. But I again, she feels comfortable though. It felt a little more canned, but she feels comfortable talking about it. When she first said it at the debate, she didn't really to me, and it was a pretty strong debate. I thought, and like that part got kind of lost in the wash, really. But she brings it up, and I don't know. At least the people I was around, we were all like, is that even real? Right? Like there was a sense of like, is that true? Like, does she really own a gun? And
I think
and
it's
so
surprised a lot
at
of
the
people.
first debate, it did feel a little forced, like it was a practice line. But as it turns out, I just think that her comfort discussing it shows that it was not forced. And whatever you think about her gun policies, like that, this is at least somewhat authentic. And I think that gives it a little bit more power.
'Cause it definitely is a canned line. It definitely was at the debate.
It
And
was at
she's
the debate.
repeated how she said it. This is a good point that you made. She's not the one who voluntarily came out and said it was a handgun and it was a Glock. She was asked by 60 Minutes, Bill Whitaker, what kind of gun it was, because they have been very tight-lipped on the details of this stuff, because it does raise a number of policy questions. But here, this is sort of a vibes thing she's getting, right? It's not a policy thing. She hasn't really changed anything on policy. I mean, she's running on the same basic policy that Biden was running on. She's had to kind of walk back some of the more extreme stuff she was supporting throughout her career, like the mandatory buyback of ARs and then the total handgun ban in San Francisco that she backed. But it's more of a vibes line. And you're right. She was just saying, I own a gun, and that means I won't take your gun. And whereas the fact that we knew it was a pistol because she had said this back in 2019 briefly in like one appearance, and we got some background from that. And then now she's been asked about it. So I suppose it wasn't saying it was a handgun is not part of her messaging. She just being a gun owner is the message, right?
I think that's right. I'm interested. We can talk about that a little bit more if you want. The other element to this that is interesting to me, and that is maybe again just CYA, or maybe just Democratic caution, or maybe the fact that they just have PTSD from losing on the gun issue for so long. But she's focused on that. On the defensive message, which is really is, right? Which is like, don't be scared of me. I am a gun owner. It's like she's not really trying to win anybody over. She's just trying not to lose anybody, that might be gettable for her that is a gun owner, is really what that is. It's the defensive message. Yeah. The offensive message of trying to wedge with Trump is very like paint by numbers. Like it's just, as you said, it's like, we're going to do the background checks people have been talking about for 50 years, and we're going to do red flag laws, which I think are good law, but again, and we're going to do, and she kind of throws in the assault weapons ban, but doesn't, maybe you've seen more details than I have, but she doesn't talk about it. It doesn't give very many details. And I don't know, man, I think that the Democrats have with the school shootings, with the Trump attempted assassin being 20, with a lot of the school shooters being under 21, I know there's some I'm not the legal guy. You have legal guys on this podcast. There are potentially some legal issues with this, but as just a straight political matter, like I think gun age, like an offensive gun age message is something that I've been telling Democrats that they should run on, because I think it's a winner and nobody wants it. If you think about the swing voters Trump's trying to talk to, these suburban former Republican types, they're going to be mostly aligned with like 20-year-olds shouldn't have a gun. 18-year-olds shouldn't have a gun without certain like whatever, like passing certain rules and licensing, same way you could have car keys. Like, it's crazy that somebody can buy a Zin, or somebody can't buy a Zin, excuse me, or a White Claw, but they can buy a weapon. Like, regardless of what you think about that as policy, I guess a political message, I think that's super strong, and there's been enough events that they could kind of tee off on. And they just don't do it. Like, to me, it just feels like they have given up on the idea that common sense gun reform, that there's any element of that could be a political winner. And I think that that's wrong.
That's interesting. Because, and I do want to get probably at least touch on Trump and his strategy and what you're thinking there. But as far as Harris goes, yeah, like, well, I guess before let's get into the policy side of it, right?
Sure.
The messaging of her owning a gun does feel like, as you said, a CYA thing, just like, hey, don't worry about me. I know maybe you want to vote for me because you're worried about, Trump and trying to overthrow the election or any number of other things with Donald Trump. But you're not totally sure that whether I'm going to be like I was as DA of San Francisco, or I'm going to be a more milquetoast Democrat.
Right.
She's kind of putting out there, I'm going to be the more milquetoast version. But she's, again, that doesn't, as you said, it doesn't feel like an actual attempt to get people who vote on guns, gun owners who vote on pro-gun policy to come over, because she hasn't changed, she hasn't moved on where the campaign was on guns, as they've just stuck with what they were, which includes really a fairly far left position as far as the last 20 plus years go on
with the assault weapons ban.
Yeah, the assault weapons ban has not been part of most Democratic presidential campaigns over since Al Gore, right? And so she hasn't actually moved that way. And also, they haven't really presented any sort of new idea. I mean, I guess red flag laws are kind of a newer thing, right? They poll fairly well. Yeah. But you're right. They're not going into like age restrictions or something else on that the gun control community would want.
Yeah. And even on the assault weapons,
mistake? Like, where do you see, like, it just feels like a pretty generic.
Yeah,
here's our platform
do.
And what it's been since Biden's been in.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think even on the assault weapons ban, it's like, it almost feels like she's taking the baggage of that without any of the plus, right? Because like she says that she's going to do it, but they're not campaigning on it. They're not running any ads on it. They're not trying to persuade anybody that that's a reason to vote for her, not Trump. Like it's like it's a total box check. And I don't know.
It feels like kind of threading the needle. Like, I don't want to scare off gun voters that might vote for me on things other than guns, but I don't want to push away the gun control people either. Yeah,
I want the progressives to to know that I'm not like, I'm not taking too far to the center. So, yeah, I don't know if there's a lot to be gained there. And I do look, I've long been an advocate. I think that the Democrats, like 90s Democratic gun and crime policies, are popular. We can discuss what you think about the merits of the policies. There'll be people on the left that don't like 90s crime policies, people on the right that don't like the Democrats' 90s gun policies, but they're popular when paired together. And Kamala having this law enforcement background adjacent, I gave her an opportunity to do that, I think, which is to say that like my message is crime is on the way down. We could crack down on crime even more. Like we do need to support our police. Donald Trump says he supports the police, but he sat by and did nothing as the Capitol Police were getting attacked, right? Like I will actually be an ally for police and, kind of getting away from the defund thing. And we're going to pair that with more aggressive efforts to take guns out of the hands of criminals, right? We're going to pair that with, maybe an age restriction or some other new or kind of putting a little more meat on the bone of the red flag law. We're going to pair that with making sure domestic abusers like don't get guns or outlet, something, that is something new that people can hear. And I think that would be a winner for Democrats politically if it was a proactive effort to wedge the other side. And they just don't want to go there. I think it's out of I don't think it's based on data. I think it is out of trauma, being traumatized by this being a losing issue for them for a long time. And not really having maybe also the kind of ad makers that are good at it. I don't know. Like I imagine being a former Republican, I feel like it gives me a better skill at this. I'm like, I think that of the push granny over the cliff ads that Republicans used to run, and I think the Democrats could run some pretty scary ads related to gun stuff. that they just don't want to. They don't want to go there to try to fix
Interesting.
it. So anyway, that's my opinion. But so I think the strategy as it is, to me, it all comes back to that word we just keep saying, CYA. Like it's small c conservative, not conservative policy, but temperamentally conservative at just trying to not upset anybody on this issue, not using it as a key part of the campaign.
And, what do you think? I guess the other thing she could be doing that she's not is emphasizing that she owns a gun and Donald Trump can't own a gun.
Can't.
Because he's a convicted felon at this point. Well, it's a bit odd that they don't bring that in because she is talking about his prosecution. It's not like she wants to stay away from talking about the prosecutions or his convictions.
Yeah, I do wonder if the data. I do wonder if the data is if there's seeing something that makes them think that it doesn't work, because she came out of the gate with that. The prosecutor versus the felon type thing, and like her first couple speeches. The whole like I know his type. Like I knew people that were, that were defrauded. The public.
Mm-hmm.
I prosecuted sexual predators. Right. So like she did that
convention speech.
It's through the convention speech. It's not that she's not doing it now, but like it has been de-emphasized. And I do wonder if they just kind of think that like the remaining people that are gettable have already kind of decided they don't care about Donald Trump's criminal record. This is just speculation. I don't have any inside. But I got to figure out of the campaign that it's like, you're down to the final group of people. And these are people that are like, that's not that's going to get them over the line. They know about Donald Trump on this. But it is a good one-liner. And I think it's probably a mistake that she had, give it to her as a little. This is one area where I'll allow for a canned line. Throw a little canned line about the next time it comes up, being like, and I noticed that my opponent isn't legally allowed to have a firearm.
Yeah, I just feel like an obvious, like the whole "I own a gun, I'm not going to take your guns" thing is a canned line. They could easily add in that Trump can own guns. I don't know. Speaking of which, Donald Trump's strategy, in this election, it feels like a similar approach of. Don't hurt yourself with certain voters. And the way they're doing that is by primarily downplaying the issue. It's stripped out of the platform almost entirely.
Yep.
He didn't mention it in his acceptance speech once. He doesn't talk much about it on the campaign trail. He has two messages, I would say, since the convention on this, which is one is gun owners don't vote. And so he has this for a lot of different groups, right? Not just gun owners, but he'll say
like guilt tripping them into voting.
Yeah, Christians don't vote, gun owners don't vote, Jewish people don't vote, or they're voting for the wrong party, or and it's sort of all just like you vote for me. And this goes back to some of his other rhetoric that might cause problems for some voters. Like you just have to vote this one time and you never have to worry about voting again, which has led to some of those. Darkly hilarious exchanges on Fox News where the anchors will try to get him to say, you don't really mean that, right? Yeah, right. And then he will refuse to say he doesn't really mean it. But regardless, like, what do you think of his approach? I mean, in addition to that, he will also, to his credit, I guess, will say that Harris wants to take your guns.
Yeah.
And Harris does have a background of supporting a total ban on handgun possession in San Francisco, mandatory buybacks of AR-15s. So there are some guns that wouldn't fall under those two things, but most guns would. And so she has a pretty radical background on this stuff from a national point of view. Like in San Francisco, politicians, sure, she's probably in line with a lot of them, but running as a national candidate for president, her background, that's why I think in large part she's doing the CYA stuff that we just talked about, but he's not doing a lot to exploit that, right? He doesn't. No. Just like she's not doing ads, he's not really doing any ads on guns.
And you could, and I frankly think it's probably a mistake. I just politically that you wouldn't at least mix that in. I mean, they are running the ad that they're showing right now that has the most points behind it, or like the most impressions. So most times someone somewhere has seen it. Is the ad about Kamala supporting sex changes for prisoners?
Yeah,
it gets into it gets into trans issues. So that's the number one ad they've run. And so, like, you think about it. Okay, why are they doing that? Is it because prisoner sex changes are the top issue for voters? No. Right?
No, yeah.
They're doing it because it is like just this vehicle to say she is so extreme. She is so far to the left. She's not like this moderate person she's trying to convince you of. You cannot trust her. Like she's so crazy left, actually, that she wants to let like murderers get a sex change and have you pay for it with your tax dollars, right? Like that's like that's the point of the ad. Like it's not,
which is not a terrible message is there, and you can.
So why not mix it in with other stuff, right? Like that's what I'm saying. So I don't. To me, I don't see why. What you just laid out, handguns and AR-15 buybacks, handgun bans, like couldn't be another version of the same type of thing, right? Where it's like less a policy ad exactly like that's about some specific policy that you would do in 2025, but the policy is being used as an example to just continue to paint her as the most far left version of herself to voters and bleed trust in her among the same center right voters that she's trying to regain trust with by saying that she owns a Glock, right? Like those, like the Liz Cheney voter, right? Like that's the person that both sides are trying to talk to on this. So I don't know why they don't do that. Because that isn't Trump. Like I know why Trump doesn't talk about it because Trump isn't comfortable talking about it. Like just flat out. Like Trump's not a big gun person. And if we lived in a different world where the parties were reoriented, where like the anti-immigrant party like was also the anti-gun party, Trump would be anti-gun. Right? Like Trump does not care about this issue. Like he cares about being anti-immigrant and pro-tariff. And like he just landed in the party that worked with, right? Like he ran as a Reform Party candidate 20 years ago. So like he has 2 or 3 issues he actually cares about. Everything else is post facto. He's not comfortable talking about it. When he's out there on the stump, he talks about whatever he wants to talk about. He does the weave. He cares about the election fraud. Like you can tell what Trump cares about. His kids, anytime guns come up, actually, he always references his kids. He's like, yeah, I don't know anything about that. Don Jr. knows everything about that. You could talk to Don Jr., right? So,
I was actually kind of surprised to find that, I think a lot of people were surprised to hear that Harris owns a gun, even though she had said it in 2019 briefly. Yeah. I think she got a lot of backlash for saying that in 2019. It was a very different time atmosphere for Democrats at the time. I was actually kind of surprised to find out that Trump owned 3 guns, it seems like. And the reason we found that out is because he had to turn them in or at least get them out of his possession.
Feels like gifts from Don and Eric, right? And it's hard to even picture him like doing the gun thing. He just doesn't care. Like what? He's going to go to a range and put the ear muffs on his hair. You don't want to he does not putting anything on that hair.
We've actually never seen like a picture or video of him shooting or even handling a gun as though he were going to shoot. Like we've seen him hold it, usually guns that have his face engraved into them. And he doesn't, he'll hold it out as like, oh, look at this. But it's interesting because Trump's a bit of an enigma on that front because he's had a concealed carry license for a long time, even back when it was extremely difficult to get them in New York City. He had one. So, the reputation is certainly that his sons are much more the driving force around, the pro-gun stance of his campaign. But it hasn't translated well this election. Like he just doesn't. I could see the argument that this is not a top issue in the election. It clearly isn't, as much as that's bad for people who run gun politics publications, perhaps. But
like sex changes for prisoners are right. Like that's the thing. There's a way you could horn it in, and that's the surprising thing. It's less that Trump is using it on the stump or debates because like he's just not, because that's not Trump, but La Savita and like the team. Yeah, I think that's interesting because like it's not like Chris LaCivita is a strategist, has 40 years of running the Democrats are going to steal your gun ads under his belt, and he could probably just like go find an old script he did from an old campaign and just put Kamala's name in there and run it. So I don't that is a little bit more of a mystery. And I will say too, like I broke 2 similar stories in the 2016 election and this election, both about the Democratic candidate and their support for handgun bans. Right. In 2016, there was audio that came out of Hillary Clinton at a fundraiser saying she thought the Supreme Court was wrong on their big handgun case.
And the NRA took that and ran millions and millions of dollars worth of ads over it. Now, it did have audio, so there's a media difference between these two stories, and maybe that explains part of it. But this year, right, we broke the story that Kamala Harris supported a total ban on handgun possession for San Francisco residents in 2005. Similar stories, and they came out at similar times, sort of weirdly, because they weren't, I can tell you as the person who wrote them, they weren't planned or anything. It just happened to work out that way. And this time around, one, the NRA doesn't have $30 million to spend in the election like they did in 2016. And two, I just don't see the focus on it like I did from the Trump campaign in 2016. So I don't know.
It's not that just a story about the implosion of the NRA? Is that
yeah, it could be.
Maybe more than anything else? I don't know.
It could be. Yeah. I mean, because whether or not Trump wants it to be a top issue, the NRA should want it to be a top issue, don't you think? Right.
Yeah,
and in an election like this, where everything indicates it's extremely close, and the Harris campaign, as we just got finished talking about, certainly seems to think they need to do some CYA on this issue among the voters who may decide this election in places like Pennsylvania or Michigan. Anything can swing it, and I don't see why.
And you look at, and I've talked about the Liz Cheney voter, who in your head you think of as like, when you imagine that person in your head, they're like a 55-year-old white person in the suburbs, right? But like, there's the other swing voter, people are talking to, which is younger men that are kind of apathetic politically, that maybe are more culturally attuned to the Republicans, but like don't like Trump does nothing for them. Vance, like, they're a little weird, right? So it's your Joe Rogan listener that's not fully red pilled, right? It's just like the kind of is there for the boobs and the like kind of that stuff like that, right? So that person, what? Not Joe, Joe Rogan's boobs. Yeah, maybe they're there for their own pec building and the boob jokes, right? Like that, the whole thing, like that, that kind of guy in your mind's eye. That's another voter both campaigns are fighting over. The Trump is fighting over more, right? Though that Trump's trying to gobble up as many of those guys as possible because that's a demo he's doing well with. You would think this would be an issue that they could use. Like, a lot of these guys don't really know anything about Kamala's policies, right? Like, you could be providing them a new piece of information about her. They're like, oh, she wanted to ban handguns? Like, oh, okay, I didn't know that, right? And so that could be a useful nudge. So I'm not really in the business of giving Trump advice these days. I think that it's like, that feels like it would be worth a try, but they're not doing it.
Because you'd think those voters that are left who are undecided, who this isn't their top issue, but it matters to them. You think the race would be to define Kamala. She's trying to do it on the one hand by saying,
I have no idea what is happening there. I'm sorry.
You getting a call?
I don't. So I must have pressed a button, but no. But it's only one person. I've received a ton of texts. Maybe my husband's playing a gag on me, and so he's like, to get me to pay attention, he's making me. He made his own ringer different on here or something. I don't know. Sorry about
that. It's okay. Maybe it's Chris LaCivita calling you for advice on how to define Kamala. I don't know, but it seems like that's the race. She's trying to say, I'm a gun owner. I'll shoot somebody who breaks into my house just like you would. You don't need to worry about me with your guns. And on the other side, Trump is to some degree, he is saying she's going to take your guns, right? But that's kind of it. He just kind of says it sometimes. And that seems to be largely the extent of it. And that should be the thing that they're trying to define her the other way. Like, she's a radical gun grabber, right? And how that comes out. I mean, it could be a 1-2 point swing in a swing state, right? I don't know. And
again, I just keep coming back to this, especially with how much money they're dumping into the trans issue.
Yeah.
Like, there's got to be diminishing returns on the trans issue at some point.
Also, the other thing about that ad is it has a tinge of like, vote for me if you don't like trans people, right?
Right.
I mean, isn't that the baseline?
Yeah, it's also a very online thing. I think it must be working. They're not just pissing all this money away for nothing. So they must see something that makes them think it's working at least. But like the ending line, which is like, Kamala's for they, them, like that just feels like a really cutesy thing that somebody who like spends a lot of time like posting on Reddit and reading the Daily Caller and stuff. No offense, Daily Caller. Like it feels like somebody that's like super engaged in the discourse made that joke and thought it was really clever. But I was like, if my dad's watching that ad, I think he's probably like, what are they talking about? Kamalas for they, them. Like, I don't think he even understands the reference.
But it's also just like, if you don't like this group of people, vote for me. Yeah, that's what I kick.
I mean, that's a pretty core part of the Trump message, though, with the Haitians and the immigrants and trans people.
I don't want to get too far beyond our
your remit
topic here, okay. But regardless, I don't see why he couldn't do at least the same basic message if she's too radical for you with this issue instead. And speaking of which, there is some polling that might give it this. We're getting into speculation here and extrapolating, but there's been some polling that indicates perhaps there's a percentage of Republicans who are moving closer to Harris. And, do you think part of that could be that she's successfully defining herself as more of a moderate on guns, on vibes, more so than policy, but maybe it's working? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the Harris team thinks that their pivot to the center is working and has seen movement among this group. I mean, they don't like, she campaigned with Liz Cheney. Like, she didn't have to do that, right? Like, Liz Cheney could have done a separate thing. There's potential risk there on the left with people being like, are you getting too cozy with the neocons, like with the warmongering Cheneys or whatever. Like, so She did it because I think they feel like they've had some success with that group, but also because I think that there are more of those voters that are gettable. And if you look at the Marquette poll of Wisconsin, among the undecided voters that are left, I think it was 50% were Republicans who don't like Trump. And then it was like 40% were independents and 10% were Democrats. So if half of the remaining undecideds are Republicans who don't like Trump, you got to assume that group is mostly sympathetic towards gun rights, at least. Maybe they're gun owners, like they're somewhere on that spectrum. And so I think that if you just look at the material the Harris campaign is putting out, it is not hard to divine that in their mind's eye, they're talking to that 50% of the undecided voters that are left.
Do you think they're trying to here's the thing for me, right? People who follow me know that I'm not a Donald Trump voter. I haven't voted for him in the past. I don't plan on voting for him in this election, but it seems easier to get somebody like that to sit out the election perhaps than to come over and actually vote for Harris, especially based on if they care about gun policy on guns, because they haven't moved much at all on the policy side. It's more of a vibes message, a CYA vibes message. So I don't know, is that their attempt, or do you think they really think they can bring people over?
No, I don't. I think that's true. I think that if you put it all together, what they're trying to do is say, okay, you don't have to be scared of me on guns and on fracking and on, I'm sure we can come up with a couple other issues, right? Like where she's changed on, where she's like, I'm not going to ban fracking. I'm not going to take your guns. You don't have to be scared of me on that. You should vote for me because democracy, foreign policy, standing with Ukraine, small, opportunity economy, small business tax cuts, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I think that is how they see it. Like that in speaking to those voters, there is I'm not the scary socialist they say I am part to the message. And then there is and here's some things that we're aligned on part to the message. The guns vibes thing is in that first bucket, not in the second bucket.
It's not we're aligned on guns. It's I'm not as scary as
they want you to think, or you might be worried I am or whatever. Yeah.
Do you think she should do more on that? Like, she's got this very basic vibes message. She's not answering a lot of questions, even from places like the New York Times about for instance, the 2005 ban. Like, why did she support that? Does she not support it anymore? Why did she own a hand? There's a lot of things you can get to that she could have some answer for, at least.
I think that they just probably, no. My real honest answer is no. I don't know what is. I feel like that's a bucket of vipers for her.
They just don't want to get into it.
Yeah, I just think the more you get into it, the more vulnerable you are on the details, and I just don't think that that's necessarily a winner. And I think that they're maybe feel like they've gotten as far as they can get on that. I mean, clearly somebody you're a little bit of a different category, right? Because like somebody that doesn't like Trump, that is a potential swing voter, for whom guns is one of their one or two top issues.
Right.
I just think the Harris people are probably like, that's probably not, I mean, the
They're
best we can
not a lot of
probably
those people.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, not a lot of those people, and the best we can probably do with those people is that they just stay home or write in whatever, or vote down ticket, and that'll be a win if we can get them to that. We're trying to talk to the people that don't like Trump, are Republicans, are sympathetic to gun rights, maybe own a gun, but the issues they care about are, foreign policy or abortion rights or democracy, right? Like that is like, those are the people that they're trying to get to.
Right. So she's never going to put out a message or make a hard drive at trying to get, somebody like me or
I don't think so.
Whoever.
Sorry. I know it's nice to be seen and loved and courted, but I don't think that they're coming for you, Stephen.
I don't think Trump is trying to get people like me either, though, honestly. People who have concerns about his behavior in the past, the election, all that, but find his policies, his record on guns, at least better than Harris's, right? But it doesn't seem like he keeps complaining about gun owners don't vote, but he's not really giving them a lot of reasons other than look at Kamala Harris's record to come out and vote, right?
Yeah, and I would also say to gun owners that are looking at him and voting for him just on that, I would say he is just totally unreliable on anything besides the border and tariffs and his own personal feelings about things that he wants. I would say that about people on any issue. He's totally the only extent to which he would be a reliable ally on gun issues is because you would assume the people that would be around him executing most of the policy would be gun friendly. But on a personal matter, I don't know. If something happened 3 years from now and he thought that it could help him or help his kid or whatever, help it personally for him to do something, change his mind, he would change his mind. It's just not, that's just Trump.
Yeah. On that front, I guess, from your point of view, I'm just trying to do political analysis of it.
Okay, sure.
Do you think it's more likely that a major gun control bill passes under a Trump administration where Republicans have control of both chambers?
Yeah.
Or a Harris administration where Republicans control the Senate? Yeah.
It's a good question. This is one of my favorite counterfactuals for my Enviro friends. I'm always like, if only we had John McCain back in 2008. I was like, all of your cap and trade climate dreams would have come true with a Republican president because they would have wanted to cut a deal on some issue that makes some of them look centrist. So I think that you're correct about that. I think where you're going with this is correct. It's going to be a Republican Senate. Okay. Who knows? Anything can happen in politics, but the Montana and West Virginia seats are gone as far as I'm concerned. So it would have to be a very surprising win by Colin Allred in Texas or something for the Democrats to get to 50.
Unlikely.
So I think it's super unlikely. As such, there is no assault weapons ban is going to be passed through a Republican Senate with Kamala Harris as president. That's just not going to happen.
At least not in the first 2 years.
Yeah, sure. Not in the first 2 years. And something else can happen in 2 more years. You could have stuff on the edges, right? Could the bump stocks thing that got overturned by the Supreme Court go through Congress with a Harris and a Republican? Could that be something where a few Republicans in the Senate feel like this is something where they can give on? Sure. I'm not saying that there's a 0%, and then in 2 years,
a bipartisan Safer Communities Act type bill.
Yeah, sure. Something like that could happen under Kamala. But again, I don't know. I think with Trump, you saw this on criminal justice reform, right? Maybe the best bill, in my opinion, that Trump passed was, it's kind of crazy to think about that it was with Republicans controlling everything, that he was convinced by Jared and by some people around him that doing a criminal justice reform made sense. Might there be a world where he gets convinced that it helps soften his image or something?
He's come out and publicly supported when he was president after Parkland.
Yeah.
He talked about red flag laws and supporting them. He's talked even during this campaign about not being, staying behind the bump stock ban, which he did unilaterally, which really kind of set up the model for what Biden has done through executive orders. And then also for stop and frisk policies, which are similar in nature to red flag orders in that they don't require, court action for you to, or they don't have the same due process protections as,
Right.
as other proceedings, at least when it comes to taking someone's guns away. So,
And clearly, by the way, just if we could just stop on that one for a second, when you think about Trump and like what are the things that he actually cares about? I've been talking about immigration and tariffs, but I would say that like also like letting police do whatever the F they want is another thing that is a pretty visceral, that is for Trump is much more visceral than gun rights. You know what I mean? And so if like that, if gun rights and police rights come into conflict at some point during the Trump term, you know which side Trump is going to fall on that, like for sure.
Yeah, unless again, I guess it's based on the people around him. Like there was New York Times reported that after the Walmart shooting in El Paso that he considered supporting an assault weapons ban, but I believe it was Mick Mulvaney told him it would lose him voters, so he didn't do it. Yeah, I don't know. Whereas like that's, of course, you look at the other side and you see Harris, and while she may be saying she wouldn't push for a mandatory buyback or whatever, like most people probably assume she would go that where her true, like she keeps saying her values haven't changed, right? And I think people would fairly believe that that's the case, and she's probably going to sign any gun control bill that gets to her desk. Yeah, right. And then I guess the more serious concern is like how seriously do you take the court packing stuff from Harris and Democrats at this point? Because that's the bigger concern, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know what from the last 4 years would make you think that the Democrats have the resolve to pass big fundamental changes to the political system in any way. I mean, like they didn't even try. Like they had 2 years. Like they didn't try to add, and think of things that are more easy than DC or than, the Supreme Court, adding DC and Puerto Rico as a state. Like that, I mean, that is also challenging, right? But like if you think about fundamental reforms, like the types of things they could have done, like there are a bunch of things, the filibuster, like there are a bunch of things that they could have done that have much fewer political hurdles than court packing, and they didn't really even go there. So I mean, if we were running down a situation where Kamala Harris if this was 2008 and Kamala Harris was potentially about to head into a situation where she had 59 senators and the House, like Obama did when he went in 2008. I guess he went in with 60. It ended up at 59. Yeah, it went in with 60. It ended up at 59. Then I would think that if you're a listener to this and you don't like Trump, that gun rights are your number one issue, I would be saying to you, you should maybe be concerned. I mean, I probably wouldn't be saying that to you because, I still don't want Trump to win. But that would be thinking time for a legitimate concern. And that's just like not the situation we're going in right now. And maybe long-term, generationally, there are reasons to be, to think that the Democrats will prioritize the court and court reform, but like that's not a Kamala Harris first term. Yeah,
and frankly, it doesn't seem like Democrats or Republicans are going to get to that point where they can get 60 senators
for a while,
anytime in the future, in the near future. I mean, this race, when I look at it, and you just take each candidate in isolation, they seem like terrible candidates. Right. Not necessarily based on performance. I think Kamala Harris has been fine, generally speaking. But the Democrats tried to stick with Biden, who was, I think, clear to pretty much every voter that he was too old to do this for another 4 years, even for the rest of this term. And then didn't have a real primary, and then switched in the middle of July or the end of July to a brand new candidate who has had a middling performance in the national stage before this point, right? And then you look, and also the inflation and all the economic struggles that they may be getting better, but they're still something that's at the top of mind for pretty much all voters. And then you look over at everything with Trump and trying to overturn the last election, the general polarizing nature of his character, where he's been underwater pretty much his entire public career in politics and so on and so forth. And you think in isolation, these seem like terrible campaigns that wouldn't win otherwise, except the fact that they're going up against each other. Yeah. I don't know.
That's thermostatic nature to all this too, right? I mean, I think that had the Republicans nominated somebody better, I think maybe the Democrats' incentives would have been different and vice versa. Sure. But here we are.
Well, each side sure seems to have thought up until this very moment that they would easily win this campaign. And I think maybe that's where a lot of these problems stem from. But I don't know. Either way, I appreciate you coming on and giving your point of view and trying to give us, a fair also analysis of what's going on and not just cheerleading for one side or the other, right? That's what we
happy to do it. Appreciate that you're out there, man. And there need to be more outlets like this. And I come to you, even though I don't always agree with the policy proposals. I come to you for a straight and clear and understanding of what's happening when gun stuff flares up. No pun intended there. And so I appreciate the work that y'all are doing. So stay in touch.
Hey, absolutely. And I like having people from all different perspectives as long as I can trust that they're trying to tell me what they honestly believe in. So that's why.
This is the key to podcasting. I was like, that is my rule for Bulwark podcast guests. I was like, I only have people on that tell me what they think. And we've lost a couple guests on this principle. And that's okay. That's okay.
That's right.
So I think that's a good principle.
Fed, what they already agree with. There's a lot of places they can go to get that.
Plenty of fish in the sea for that.
So, hey, look, speaking of the podcast, can you tell people a little bit more about where they can find more from you?
Yeah, sure. Well, over on YouTube, the Bulwark YouTube page, I'm popping on there a couple times a day. The Bulwark podcast comes out every afternoon. I interview a range of guests. I mean, the core guests are kind of never Trump Republican types, but then we mix in center-left Dems, subject matter experts on various issues, and sometimes lefty Dems or MAGA Republicans I'll argue with. Not really right now during prime election season, but I like doing that as well. So I've really enjoyed the show, man. It's been really fun, and I think that people will find that the conversations are lively and honest. So that's what I'm going for.
Awesome. All right. Well, speaking of promoting another
podcast, now you got to promote the Dispatch.
Podcast.
By the way, I've gone over on the Dispatch podcast to argue with them several times. It's hilarious. The Dispatch is also
very
anti-Trump Republican.
Similar,
they're
but
one
different.
tick over from us on their hostility towards Democrats. And so it's like we have these. There's a line called, I forget if it's Oscar Wilde. I don't know. Somebody else check me on that. The narcissism of small differences. So it's like sometimes the Dispatch and the Bulwark get really fighty because we have these small differences that are so important to us, but we're directionally aligned. And I love hashing it out with those guys.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell people just a little bit more about the Dispatch and how they can get a free trial over there as well. So, all right, let's hand it off to myself. This week, we're doing another ad swap with the Dispatch. We have a free 30-day trial over at the Dispatch for any Reload reader who wants to give them a try. And I think it makes a lot of sense because we tend to focus on the same things. Of course, the Dispatch has, in addition to reporting, a lot of opinion and analysis from big name folks you probably heard of. Steve Hayes, Jonah Goldberg, Alla Pundit. And there's a lot of guys over there that have been major players in the center-right conservative media space for a long time and who I enjoy reading quite a bit. But in addition to their opinion and editorial work, they have a distinct focus on facts-first reporting, on hard news in the same way that we do here at the Reload. And I think that if you like the reporting we do, if you like our approach, you will probably enjoy the Dispatch and their approach. And they're an even bigger publication than we are, with more resources, with a wider view, of course, of politics. They go into a lot more areas than we do. And so I think they're just a really good resource, and you should check them out. Sign up for that 30-day free trial. Give it a try. Been a paying member since they were founded, and I highly recommend them. So head over to the Dispatch today to check out what they have to offer. We have a link, of course, in the description and on our website to the 30-day free trial. So give it a try. See what you like.